If you've had any cryptid encounters that you'd like me to share on here, email me at jttosstories@gmail.com. Story 1. About 10 years ago, my best friend and I decided to stop by a local hangout of ours in Bowie, Maryland. We grew up there and spent our early years wandering the railroad tracks and woods, doing what kids do. So this one spot is a railroad overpass at 450 and 197. There's a parking lot and a small area of grass and trees, about 30-foot strip of land separating the tracks and the lot. So it's nighttime, and we decide to go out there to smoke a cigarette. We go on the tracks, and we're facing the parking lot, so the overpass, and to our left, and the tracks go on to our right. Now we're smoking, and he's talking, but the entire time I'm focused to my right, peering down this track, because I have the strangest feeling. I didn't know what it was until later, and it was the feeling of being watched by a predator, which I've never experienced before. After about 2 minutes, we're almost done with our cigarettes, and a helicopter flies right above us, seemingly at tree level, with the spotlight going right over us, coming from the direction of the overpass. Not 10 seconds later, I hear the gravel shift from between the tracks, and I look towards the overpass. Standing right in the center of the overpass, there is this giant silhouette. Now, since it is dark and it's under the overpass, I can only see its silhouette. It's about 8 or 9 feet tall and incredibly burly looking. It was huge, and we only looked at it for about a second before I said, "Let's go. Now." Now we hurriedly started rushing away, and we hear the gravel move closer and closer, and not 3 seconds later, we both hear the demonic, horrifying, multiple-pitch screech literally right behind our heads. It came from no more than a foot behind us. So of course we book it to his car, and no, we didn't look back because, are you kidding me? Get real. We get to his car, and funny thing, his lanyard got stuck around the steering wheel, and when we pulled out, his keys pulled out of the ignition as he turned the steering wheel. Anyway, we drive for around an hour, and the only thing we could say is, "What was that?" And, well, that's my encounter with the goat man. Now, a week later, we're hanging out with a friend. Let's call him Andy. Now, Andy has spent a lot of time in the woods, and he was telling us about how last week the cops were out in the woods because they heard screams and thought that some woman was being attacked. Now, I asked him if they had helicopters, and he said yes. And I asked him what day it was, and it was the same night we saw the goat man. So we told him our experience, and he was like, "Yeah, that was him. You saw the goat man." There is a picture of it online if you search Bowie Goat Man, and I believe that's what it looks like. Also, there is some lore regarding him, but there are varying origins. Story 2. I rarely ever tell this story because it's not really mine to tell. But anytime my dad or my brother mention it, the look on their faces makes the hair on my body stand up. We're from upstate New York, and we used to have a cabin in the Catskill Mountains. This was probably close to 15 years ago, maybe even more. My dad and brother were driving along a road in the dead of night when they passed by something that both of them, to this day, struggle to put into words. My brother had his head against the window, tired from the day's adventures, so his face was just feet away from the guardrail where an approximate 8-foot-tall enormous figure was walking on the side of the road. My brother didn't move. My dad saw it too. Neither of them knew if the other saw it. They kept quiet the entire 10-minute drive back to where they were going. My brother said he looked at my dad twice, eyes bugging out, to see if my dad was showing any signs of having seen what he had just seen. He said my dad was staring off into space, totally transfixed. Neither of them said a word. Finally, my dad pulled over into a parking lot, not even reaching their destination, turned off the car and just stared. They eventually looked at each other, and both of them started freaking out. Screams of, "Did you see that? What was that?" rang out. My dad said the figure almost looked like a bear, but not really. And being from where we are, we know what bears look like. He said it looked almost human-like, but walked with a weird stiffness, definitely not turning its head to look at the car. My dad said he knew that whatever that was deliberately shielded its face. I ask my brother now and what he thinks he saw that day, and he always says, "Dude, I honestly don't know. Something I've never seen before." My dad knows he was a Sasquatch, and based off the looks in their faces when we talk about it, I 200% believe him. My dad's grandma lived off the land in a small cabin, also near the Catskills. When my dad and uncle were young, they would spend summers with her. One day, a group of people asked if my dad and uncle wanted to come with them to camp out at the base of a specific mountain that was known for sightings. My great-grandma forbid them from going. Her words rang clear as day through my dad's mind plenty of times since the sighting. She said, "You boy, let's leave that thing alone." My dad believes that she knew they existed, and maybe she'd even seen some herself. And whether it be her not knowing what they are capable of, or her just against the species being hunted or gawked at, she didn't let them go. Sorry for the rant, but just felt nice to share this story. Story 3. This event happened when I was 8 to 10 years old in the garden of the house I used to live in. I'm telling this story as I remember it without fabricating anything whatsoever. One day I was playing in my garden. I liked to play with the ball I had or look through the chain link fence, which separated our family's property from a river. Now, to explain the situation which occurred, I need to explain the shed we had in the garden. Now, this shed was placed directly at the back of the garden, in the middle of the chain link fence. This meant I could enter the shed from the front, go to the right side of the shed or the left, but not the back as it was placed in front of the fence. Another important note is that the right wall of the shed had a window that would grant you vision of the inside of the entire shed. One of the things I really enjoyed doing was walking over to the right side of the shed, knocking the window 3 times, ducking down, then getting up and looking directly at the window. I remember doing this because it was fun for little me, but of course, nothing would ever show itself. Although I only did this as a way to roleplay. This day was very different. Although parts of my memory are hazy, I remember the main event with perfect detail. I was watching the river through the fence, then I walked to the right side of the shed. I knocked on the window 3 times and ducked down. When I jumped back up and looked through the window, the pale white humanoid thing sprouted up and looked at me. I remember it looked me in the eyes, then it opened its mouth and started moving it. I wasn't moving it in a way as if it were talking, but it was just moving its lower jaw really fast. It's hard to describe. It was just moving its mouth really quickly, and I felt maliciousness coming from this creature. After that, it just ducked down as quickly as it had come up. The situation must have been 5 seconds long, and I remember just staring at the window dumbfounded, completely shocked at what I saw. Even though remembering the situation now makes me really creeped out and scared, 8-year-old or 10-year-old me was really more curious and perplexed than frightened. So, I did what any curious child would have done and entered the shed. After all, there was only one way in and out, which was the front door. The only window of the shed could not be opened anyway, so that thing should have been inside. When I walked into the shed, I saw nothing. The shed itself is really small, so there would have been nowhere to hide. I just remember being confused more than anything, so I closed the door and continued playing outside. Looking back at the situation as an adult, I would have absolutely ran away, as the thing was only human-shaped, but definitely not from our world. Also, I get scared pretty easily as well. This situation only happened once to me and never again, even though I played the window knocking rituals dozens of times after the event occurred. I wouldn't be surprised if it was an overactive imagination, and I'm definitely open to that idea. The only problem was that the creature felt so real, I can't imagine young me conjuring up such a creepy thing from my mind. I also thought that maybe it was my reflection being slightly distorted as it rose up at a similar rate I did. Only problem with that theory is that the creature ducked down while I was still standing up. If you guys have any theories, suggestions, ideas, or just some questions, then feel free to let me know what you think. Thanks for listening to my story.